Hello, everybody. Welcome to Project Seek. Today I'm with my youth leader, or at least my former youth leader, Hugo Vasquez. He's been a great influence in my life. I'm really proud to have him on this podcast today. Welcome, Hugo.
Thank you, Brother Tyler.
So, how many years were you in youth ministry?
I started off as a youth helper, youth worker at a different church than I attend right now. So, let's see, 13 years.
Wow, that's incredible.
13 years of youth ministry. So, yeah.
So, you probably know the ins and outs of youth ministry then.
I think youth ministry changes constantly, but yeah, I have a basic understanding of stuff. A lot of things change, but a lot of things stay the same.
So, what was one of the hardest struggles in adjusting to youth ministry?
Probably time. As a youth leader, youth worker, whatever you are working as, is time. Youth ministry takes up a lot of time and it all depends on what stage of youth ministry you're at. If it's youth worker, youth leader, each one takes different amount of times. When you're a youth worker, basically when you're a youth worker or youth helper, volunteer, you're there, you get told you're gonna help out, you show up, you do the work, and you leave. Once you begin, if you're a church or whatnot, your ministry has like a team. If you become part of the team and you're more of a member of the team, then there's different things that you have to do. So setting up, getting there like if your event's on a Wednesday, you have to get there on a Tuesday to set up. But depending on what your event is, there's different kinds of setups. There's some series that you can do in class that could take maybe 2-3 days to set up. So as a youth member of a team, you get more time involved in helping set up. When you become the youth leader, then that's a whole other thing, because as a youth leader, not only do you have to go and set up, but you also have to do the scheduling. You have to do the meetings. You have to do meetings with pastor. You got to do meetings with other ministry leaders. You got to go buy the stuff. You got to plan the stuff. You got to figure out what day is available to do different things. There's so much that... So depending on where you're at in your youth ministry walk, it changes. So it all depends on how your youth ministry is set up. But the hardest thing probably in youth ministry is timing. For me, it was timing, especially. And then it changes. Like if you're a single guy, then you have more available time.
Yeah,
if you're a single guy, once you get a family, once you get kids, and that becomes different. When me and my wife, when we started helping out in youth, we were newlyweds, so we had a lot more time. And then things changed. We had kids, and time was not. We didn't have as much time. But to us, probably the biggest battle will be timing. Timing is like finding time to do more things is probably the hardest thing.
All of a sudden, time became valuable.
Yeah, exactly. It went so slow when you're younger. You're like, especially summers and stuff like that. You're like, man, I can't wait until summer's done, or man, why is this taking so long for the school year to be over? Then you get old and you got responsibilities. You got to work and take care of the family and stuff, and now you don't have enough time to do stuff, and you're like, man, I wish I had more time. But yeah, I think, and like I said, it's depending on your age and depending on where you're at sitting in ministry, your time looks different. So I think that's one of the biggest things is timing, especially in youth ministry. You have to plan accordingly to everything.
So how did you do planning and scheduling as a youth leader? How do you, I guess you say, plan all these events and organize all of these extracurricular activities?
Right. So that all depends too. Like if I'm talking to like a youth worker or youth leader or youth pastor or just a youth volunteer, that all depends. When we first started off youth ministry, we just got told to be there at a certain time, so we just showed up. We did whatever they told us to do. most of the time there was some cleanup. Maybe there wasn't some cleanup. So it was like you got there, did the event, and then left. Once we became youth members, then that youth team members, it became more because we had to do series, so we got to teach and things like that. So there's that one's a little bit different because when you're youth team member, you also get told what you're teaching, so it's not too bad. Once you become a youth leader and you got to decide what you're teaching, it changes because the way we decide on things is we pray. We definitely, that's the first thing. We pray about the events. We pray about what it is that we're doing. Why do we want to do it? Does it serve a purpose? Are we just having fellowship, or does this fellowship actually mean anything, or is it just an event where we're just gonna have fun and there was nothing involved in it? So you got to think of your church. Our church, the way we handle things is we turn in our calendars usually not a year in advance, but we did start in like October. I think it would be October where we turn in our dates, and now because we have so many ministries running at the same time, now it's like September, October, we're starting to turn in our events for the following year. And when you plan, it's harder when you have a lot more ministries than if it was just like it's Sunday school and just regular church. There's not so much. There's no, you don't have to go up to this other ministry and say, "Hey, are you available during this time?" Right. So it's kind of hard once your church is big enough where you have a lot of ministries running. Things change because planning for events, it's harder. You have district events, you have Bible quizzing events. Depending on where you're at, we have events for the Spanish ministry in our district. So there's so many. And then you got, if you're a youth pastor or youth leader, you got to think about your students and their schedule in school. And there's so much that goes into it, because you can say we're going to have an event this day, and then because we've had it happen where you say we're going to have an event this day, we're going to have it this Friday night, and then come to find out there's an event that's not part of the church's, it's not a church event, but a lot of the people from the church are going to be at this event. So, or like a birthday party or something like that. So you're like, I have this event that I want to do that day, but is it really okay to do this event when you know that the people aren't going to show up? So in youth ministry, you have to think about, is this event going to be big enough? Is it enticing enough for them to miss something else that's not part of the church event, So you got to think of all of that. These series so we use different contents for series. There's so much material out there now. Who helps us out a lot is we have our family pastors. They help us out with different series. We have our pastor that helps us out with that too. So we have a lot of resources for like lessons and stuff like that. Planning them, it gets complicated. So depending on how your church runs, you can plan for a series that can take 4 Wednesdays. We have church on Wednesday, so 4 youth classes on a Wednesday now. So we had this problem just happen. We had a problem just happen in June where we had no class on a Wednesday night because there were so many different events going on. We had VBS, we had family camp, we had youth camp, we had something else that we had. So there was 4 Wednesdays in June that we weren't going to have a class, which we had already planned all our stuff for June. So you either cancel your events or you have to shift them. So in youth ministry, unfortunately, is it's probably the one that gets moved the most. So the ministry that if you're working in youth ministry, you gotta be on your toes and flexible, because not to say that youth ministry is not important, but there is a lot of things that will take, and youth ministry is more flexible. Well, it should be flexible. It should be able to help with other ministries. Our young people in our church, all our young people are involved in other ministries. So like VBS, there was no point to have a class on Wednesday night when all our kids are helping in VBS. So all our youth were there, they were helping, and to us, it's more important for them to be involved in ministry and stuff like that than us try to teach them on a Wednesday night when there's going to be 3 or 4 kids there. So planning, depending on where your church is at, depending on where you're at, with your kids as well. Like if your youth ministry only has 6 to 7 kids, it's gonna look different than if you have 24 to 30 kids. At one point we had 38 kids, so we had to make plans for like when we went out and did like fellowships and stuff like that, to now where we have 24, or sometimes on a Wednesday night we'll have 12 or 14. So depending on how your youth ministry is being run and how many kids are, your dynamics and your planning can change. Ours is, we're very flexible. We've learned to be very flexible. I've been doing this for, like I said, 13 years. So I've learned that there's some things that take priority over others. There's some series that you're like, I want to do. I feel like this is what we need to do in the beginning of the year when you're doing your planning, when you're praying for it. You're like, yeah, I feel like this is gonna hit during this time, and then you planned it the year before, and then you get to that stage, or let's just say you planned it in August, and then the following August, there's some things that have happened in your church. There's some things that happen to your youth ministry. There's some things that happen, in the world, and you're like, I need to do something else. So you have to be flexible. God will move you to change different things. The series, there's series that you have planned that are like so great, and you're like, if I do this series right now, is it going to be appropriate? Is it going to be, is it right for this moment? So you got to be flexible with it. Planning, if you have a youth team, or if you don't have anybody, if it's just yourself, that planning takes different. We luckily have a youth team, so all the burden doesn't fall on us or anything like that. So we can say, hey, hey, can you pick this up? Or, if something gets left behind, hey, can you run to the store and things like that. So when we do our planning, that changes too, because so if me and my wife, we're going to plan the events around our life as well. If I have 3 kids, so if the kids have like a doctor's appointment or anything like that that's going to be on the youth event, we'll switch it, or we'll have to change it or whatever. You always try to plan your events on days that you're free, right? So you can't plan your life, your personal life, and then to put church events on top of it, because it becomes too hard. And then that's a little bit more easier when it's just you being the youth pastor, you being the youth leader by yourself. And when you have a team, then you have to plan with them. Hey, we want to have this event June 27th. Are you going to be able to be there? And then, no, you can't be there. So now you have to look at their schedule. You have to look at your schedule. You have to look at the church schedule. So I think the hardest thing is in its timing, it's timing. It's just trying to figure out where everything falls. Planning the series, planning your events, planning time alone, just having personal time, having time just to relax, having fellowships and things like that, banquets and all that stuff. You have to work with a lot of people at one time. So, and for, like I said, for planning for series and things like that, we have a lot of resources. We have our pastor, we have our family pastor. The UPCI has different. I mean, they have so many.
Yeah.
I mean, they just brought out a new website that they have different series in there as well, and they have something called the community that you can get resources from. So the UPCI has great and vast amounts of material for your planning for your series and stuff. So it just depends on where you're at with your youth ministry, and just we have lock-ins. A lot of youth ministers, a lot of youth pastors are starting to get away from those, but we still have them and we still love them. But usually we try to plan everything a year before, and when we plan that, we usually plan what the theme is, and we try to. We use an app called Band in our youth ministry. It makes things easier. It's kind of like a social media for groups and stuff like that. So you can post, you can do video calls and stuff like that. And there it has a calendar that we're able to put all our schedules in there, and you're able to put set reminders. So I always set a reminder for like a week or 2 weeks, and then like a day before. So, and you can put posts and different pictures and stuff like that. So
that's incredible.
As far as planning goes, we can sit here all night and talk about different things. So yeah, if we can sit here and talk about it. If you want to go more in depth about the planning, the most important thing is talking to your youth pastor, talking to your pastor.
Yeah, absolutely.
Praying, fasting, and then the series are awesome. There's times that you'll do great series. There's times that you'll just have to preach or teach or just feel what's in your heart. You have to be sensible to the Spirit to know where you need to be at as far as planning. And always, all of your events should be focused on this. Does this matter to my youth group? Is it going to elevate them? Is it going to be for fellowships? Sometimes we just go out to eat pizza. Sometimes we go eat, snow cones or whatever, ice cream. But each one we make it a priority that when we're in those events that we talk to the young people. We try, because it's a different atmosphere. You're not there waiting. The parents aren't there waiting for you. And so you get the opportunity. Every event that you plan for should be an opportunity for you to impact your young people, whether they've been in the church for all their life or if they're new. It's an opportunity. God has opened an opportunity. You have planned an opportunity to make a difference in a young person's life. So plan that way.
Wow, that's incredible. So doing lock-ins and youth events, I'm sure you have a lot of interesting stories. So what is one of the worst youth leaders fail so far?
So we went to Youth Congress one year. And I can talk about this because it's not in this particular area that we're in right now. But we went to Youth Congress one year, and me and my wife we were youth help at the time. We were volunteers, and we had volunteered to help out with the young people. So the way they had set it up in that church is when we went to Youth Congress, we would be in charge of our certain group. So 2 or 3, the girls, would be 2 or 3, the guys would be 2 and 3, and then there would be a youth help with them. And we went after Youth Congress one morning. We went to the mall. So while we were at the mall, we ate lunch at the food court, so that was good and everything. And then there was like a little bit of time for us to go do a little like wandering around and shopping and stuff like that. And so, and this is like kind of at the time where cell phones were everybody was starting to get a cell phone. It wasn't like no young people had cell phones. It was just like the youth leaders, youth helpers, the chaperones were the ones that had the cell phones, and it was like 1 or 2 that would have them. So by the time they set a limit, they were like, hey, by this time y'all need to be on the van or the bus that we were in. So we did everything. We ate, we went shopping, and did our little wandering around, and then we went up into the bus and everything, and we were leaving, and when we then the youth leader at the time there was like, "Hey, I think we're missing a young person." So at Youth Congress, we left a young person at the mall for a while, and the worst part is that it was during that time where there was no cell phones or anything like that. So it was like one of those things that we had to go inside the mall and wander around to try to find this young person. So yeah, and that was it's when a youth leader and not there gets distracted by different things, and there's always like you just kind of sometimes forget about a young person. So yeah, there was a young person that was left in the mall at Youth Congress. Luckily we weren't far away, so
that's good.
We could get them. We've had youth events where the church vans haven't ran. Like we get here, we're ready to go. We turn on the van and it doesn't turn on, and there's lots of stuff there. When we went to fall retreat one time, there was a young lady that went missing for like 3 hours, and nobody knew where she was at. And yeah, that one was bad.
Oh my goodness!
But yeah, we haven't had too many bad stories. We've been lucky and we've been blessed to have really good youth leaders that.
Yeah.
Most of our youth leaders that we've had, any team member, have been part of our young ministers class, so they're all ministry minded, so that we haven't had anybody that's been like just wandered off on their own or anything like that. But yeah, there hasn't been too much problems on our side. I can't talk about any other youth ministry that's out there, but on our side we've been blessed so far to have youth leaders that have done excellent work. There's times where I've dropped the ball and they've picked up the slack. There's been times where I've been, I've had to miss class for work or something like that. There's been an accident or something, an emergency, and I've had to call them up and be like, "Hey, I'm not going to be able to be there." And before I tell them, "Hey, this is what you need to do," they're like, "Okay, I can, I know what we got to do. I don't have to go and tell them step by step what they need to do. They already know what to do." So we have incredible guys that have always helped us. So it's been good. It's been good. We've been blessed for sure.
So how do you keep everyone together whenever you go out on a trip or like say Youth Congress? How do you keep all of the young people together?
So we have it set up that we go 2 to 3, no more than 3 together. So we'll put the chaperone. So it'll be either the chaperones or the youth leaders that we have at the time. We'll have them take 2 or 3. We always tell them to go to 2 or 3, and it's just depending on where you're going, what venue you're at. If it's a mall, it changes too. So if you're in Youth Congress, so when we're in Youth Congress, we usually take 2 vans. So we're always together at Youth Congress. Yeah. We're always together. We move together. We move as a group, and it becomes easier. If you go to a mall, like we usually go to the mall, to the food court to eat at Youth Congress or Youth Convention, and we always tell them to go 2 or 3, just for safety reasons. Yeah. And then always to have a chaperone with you. And then we don't let them go as a group, like 4, 5, or 6, because when you let them go too many people at one time, most malls have experienced really bad things when there's a group of young people. So as soon as they see your young people in a group, like they eyeball you. We've had it we've seen it sometimes where like they'll go up, like security will go up to like a youth group and be like, "Hey, y'all can't be walking around," and they'll be like, "Oh, well, there's, we have our chaperone," and they're like, "No, there's too many young people for one chaperone or 2 chaperones." So what they'll do is they they'll tell them to leave. So the way we've always handled it is that we do 2 to 3. Two to
Okay.
three is perfect. Some people don't like it, but it's better to do it like that than to be kicked out.
For sure. For sure.
Yeah. So, and it makes it easy. I mean, there's usually like most kids like to have their 2 or 3 friends together and then a chaperone. So it's not too bad. And then it's not like we're far apart or spread out too far. It's like there's a group of 3 in one store, and then on the next store there's like 2 or 3. So it's always we're right there beside each other. So it's not like we just make it that way so it doesn't look like we're a gang of people.
Right.
And then 2 and 3 is just for the safety. There's somebody. If something were to ever to happen to somebody, the other person's able to call or run to the security or to whoever can handle the emergency. That luckily we've never had a problem so far. But that's the best way we've done it.
All right, so one last question, and that is, how has youth ministry changed your life?
So youth ministry is probably the only reason I'm in church. So the person that got me into church, he was a young person. So I wasn't born in church. I wasn't born super religious. We weren't in a religious family. We did some going to like the Kingdom Hall and stuff like that, but we weren't ever. My family was never like super religious or anything like that. And the guy that invited me to church was actually, I met him in high school, and it was like an indirect involvement of youth ministry that got me into church. So the guy that got me into church, when I became friends with him, and we were friends, and in school, I met him in school, and I would never have pictured him to be somebody in the church, to be somebody that went to church and stuff like that. So he invited me, and I'm like, I was never a religious person, so I was like, no, I'm not that interested or whatever. So then the following year, it was my freshman year, I believe, and our sophomore year came up, and he came and he was like, hey man, I really want you to come to my church, just want you to experience, and it so happened that he had just come back from youth congress. So it was like youth congress, and then school started, and there's like a really like deep spiritual movement in him to be like, oh, I want to get somebody to come to church. And we were best friends. We talked all the time and stuff like that. So he's the one that got me into. He invited me, and I was like, man, I don't know. And he invited me for a long time. It was like 2-3 months, and he kept insisting and being persistent about it. And I was like, all right, I feel like, because I met him my freshman year, and I was like, man, I don't think you could ever go to church. It was one of those kind of experiences. But that I saw a change in him. He spoke different. He was different towards me. He was... the way he was towards people was different. The attitude that he had completely changed, and he invited me to church, and I was like, all right, I saw a difference. I felt the difference in him. I was like, okay, and then obviously I asked him, what is it that has pushed you to be different, and he told me about youth congress and youth ministry, and so I started coming to church, and it just happened, that I loved the church. I loved the young people. I loved the people that were there. I was the only one that came to church. So the times that I came to church was with young people. So it was with my friends. It was the friends that I made there. And it was youth ministry that literally was the reason that I started coming to church. It was my friend. He was the one that invited me. He got changed by youth congress, and it changed me when I started seeing that there was young people that were in love with God. They were different. They weren't just like just your regular people, and in when I was asked to be a help in the youth ministry, I was like, how can I help and do all this stuff? And then I realized that, a lot of the testimony that I had from my life was when I told it to them, they were like, oh man, this is different. And I helped a lot of young people change their life and see different because of, the things that God did in my life as a young person. And youth ministry to me has been the biggest part of my life. I've been in youth ministry. This is the ministry that I've had the longest. So I've done other things, but youth ministry has always held my heart because there's a lot of young people out in the world that were like me, that didn't know that there was hope, that there was mercy, that there was an opportunity, that you could change, that people could change, that there was a God that came and that sat on the throne, that robed himself in flesh and came down into this planet to walk and to live and to be treated bad and to be crucified, and he did it all for me. And I've always wanted to be that person, and because I felt it I felt darkness, I felt loneliness, I felt the despair, I felt all these things that are out in the world that they're trying to tell our young people that it's normal for you to feel. But once you get in front of God and you feel God's presence, and you know that it's a lie, you know that it's not true, that there is hope, that being in darkness and being alone it's not natural, it's not something that you're supposed to be in. And when you get a hold of God, you can find mercy and you can find hope. And the reason that I try to give everything that I can for youth ministries, because there's a lot of young people out in the world that feel loneliness. And it's kind of hard to say this, but even in the church, there's young people in the church that have been raised in the church that have lived all their life in church, and they feel lonely and they feel broken because they don't get to see that example of a youth leader that comes and tells them the truth. I was there. I was broken. I was hurt, and I was able to find it, and I can help you through it. And that's what I want for my life, for my ministry, to always be that I've helped a young person, whether it's their first day in church or if they've been there all their life, that they see God, they see love, that they see that there's hope, that they see that there's mercy, that there's an opportunity, that there's nothing that you can do that can separate you from the presence of God, that there's no lie from the devil that can convince me that God has left me. And to me, that's what the most important thing of youth ministry is because our young people are our future.
Absolutely.
There's a young person right now in a church or somewhere sitting at home who's alone and heartbroken, that could come to your church or to my church or to whoever's church, and they can be changed, and they're going to be the ones that become the youth pastors, and they're going to become the youth leaders and the youth workers, and they're going to become pastors and missionaries, and they're going to show this hope. And it all starts with youth ministry. And if we can find youth leaders and youth pastors and youth workers and youth volunteers that can show every single young person that they meet, even if they're not in church, that there's hope, and that there's something more than what the world is trying to offer. Man, we could change this whole world.
It's true.
When we can get our young people to be convinced that the lies that the world is feeding us is not true, that there is hope. There is love out there, real love that you can feel, that you can touch, and that's what youth ministry is to me. It's that opportunity for a young person to bring them out of darkness, to bring them out of loneliness, because it's not just in the world. Sometimes it's in the church, and we have to face that real truth, is that we try to make it seem that youth ministry is just about trying to reach those that are lost, Yes, it is, but there's young people in our church who've been raised in it that are lost as well, and
Yeah.
we need to reach for those too. And as a young, I was a young youth leader worker when I got the biggest shock in my life, where we all we did was we sat the kids around, and it was a simple. It was just we were gonna do a simple, just icebreaker. We
Yeah.
just went around and we said, "Hey, I'm Hugo Vasquez. I'm the youth leader here. This is something that you don't know about me."
Yeah.
And whatever it was, I can't remember what it is that, but I remember different kids that were there that had been raised in the church, and one that really impacted me was this young lady she was the daughter of like the assistant pastor at that church, and she was her dad was an awesome guy. I mean, he's the most friendliest. I mean, his family is like an example to me. Even when I had already been in church for a long time, he was an example to me. His family was an example to me. Her brothers, they were smiling all the time. They looked like the most happiest family. And when it got to that young lady, she said, "Oh, this is my name, and something that you don't know about me is I'm broken and I'm hurt, and nobody knows."
Wow.
And I remember, you know, talking to this young lady and being like, "You're not alone." And it wasn't like something that was like spiritual or something like
Right.
that. I wanted to let her know that you're not alone.
Right.
There's physical people here. It's just not something spiritual, but to let her know. But she was that girl that was Bible quizzing, that was in different ministries, and she just looked at all of us and said, "I'm broke, I'm lonely, I'm hurting, and nobody knows."
Wow.
And to me, she was raised in church.
Yeah.
She knew everything. She had the Holy Ghost. She was baptized, and she still was broken and hurting. And that's when I realized that it's not just about, the people that we say are out in the world, but it's about the young people that are in the church that are heartbroken. And that's, and still speaking about the story, that's when our youth ministry really broke out, because that set off a chain reaction in all the kids. And there was kids there that had been raised in the church that said, "Hey, I'm this guy and I'm broken and hurting too." And it just went down the line. And I remember it. I remember that was the most impactful day of my ministry starting off, because when we were done, we told them, "Hey, we're gonna get up, we're gonna pray for each other." And I remember after church, several young people came up to me, and parents came up to me, and they're like, "This is the first time I've spoken in tongues in years.
Wow.
This is the first time that I felt God in my life in years." And they have been in church for years. I mean,
Wow.
born and raised. And they were like, and I had young people tell me, "I've been thinking about leaving. I've been thinking about giving this up. I've been thinking of not wanting to do this anymore because I haven't felt God in so long." And they said, "I felt like I was alone, that I was the only one going through it." And as a youth minister, as a youth leader, you have to be vulnerable and say, "You're not the only one.
Yes.
You're not the only one that's feeling it." Because even as a youth leader, sometimes I'm like, "Man, what am I doing still here? What am I, I get heartbroken. I get lonely. And I have to push through it, and I have to get into God's presence and get renewed in the Holy Ghost." And that's what youth ministry has been to me. I've had times where, there's young people that you would think are burning, they're the ones that are praising and they're worshiping and stuff. And you get them alone and you talk to them, and they say, "I feel like I've never had a real, walk with God." And then you realize that everything that you're doing it's working. Whatever God has put in you, whatever you're doing, whatever God has put in your heart to do. Because sometimes you're like, is this series really? Does it matter? What am I? If I'm praying for these kids, but I don't see nothing. I'm doing all these events, but is it really working? And then you get some young person who tells you, Brother Hugo, if it wasn't for you telling me the truth, telling me that you felt what I felt, I might not be here. Wow. I get hyphen. I get, but I get those that I've taught when they were 15, 16, and now they're 20, 22, 25. They tell me, I remember when you told me that you loved me, and that's what I needed at the time. And that's what youth ministry has been to me about. It's just showing God's love. That's why it's so important to me, because sometimes kids get forgotten. Young people get forgotten through the mix of church, through the mix of life, through the there's just so much. As a parent, you're busy. As a church, you're busy. You got, and we forget that sometimes that young people are, no matter how well they're doing in ministry, how well they're doing in the church, sometimes it's just they do it by habit. They come to church, they do all these things by habit, and then next thing you know, you lost them. They're gone, and you're wondering why they're gone, and then you realize that you talk to them and say, "Hey, well, what happened?" And you're like, they tell you, "I've never had a relationship with God." So that's what youth ministry has been to me about, is to reach to those kids' life and tell them, hey, you're not alone in this. Because sometimes we think them young people are doing great and they're broken and they're hurting, and they have, and don't get me wrong, they have parents that love them. They're not being abandoned by their parents, but there's something in a young person's life that they see that they're not, they're not being the center of attention to their parents or whatever, because there's other siblings, there's other kids in your church, there's other kids everywhere else. Right. So you get caught up in this fantasy of what Hollywood shows you, that you're supposed to be the main character of the whole story, and that's not how it is. And when they don't feel that way, they get lost, and they're like, man, is there really a God? Is there really somebody that cares for me? Is there really somebody there? And that's what youth ministry has been to me, personal about this is my personal conviction. This is what I do in my youth classes. I make sure that every single young person that comes into that room, no matter what their background is, they know that they're loved. That they know that I tell them every time I'm done with class, I tell them I love y'all. I appreciate y'all. I want y'all to know that I'm here for y'all. I love y'all, because there's some young people that don't get that at home. True. There's young people that have never heard the word "I love you" in their life, and I was one of those young persons. When I grew up, my mom and dad wouldn't tell me, I never heard that word "I love you," and it did the damage in my life. Yeah. And I don't want that to ever be something that my kids that come into youth class, or any young person that I meet in the church, that they'll say that they didn't know that there was love there. Yeah. I want to be the example of God's love in all the young people, and that's what youth ministry has been about for me.
Thank you, Hugo, for sharing your passion, sharing your love for youth ministry.
Yes, sir.